So I'm sorry that it's taken us this long to getting around to recording the episode.
Because we suck as human beings and we're fucking lazy.
In today's episode, we will be discussing the Facebook privacy controversy, the U.S. involvement in Syria, the Count Dankula conviction, and then we will be discussing for our main news story the Parkland, Florida shooting, and then we will finally follow that up with our introduction of our new book club thing that we will occasionally do. And then, so before we get started, I wanted to kind of mention a few things. First off, I am so sorry about the kind of irregular format that this show has had, because I've changed the format like literally every episode, and this episode is no exception. We're kind of changing back to the original format to a degree. Essentially, how each episode will flow is that we will have our nice little intro segment, which will be compact and is basically what's occurring now. Then we will have our current event segment, and in the current event segment, we will be discussing news. Right now, we have our rapid fire stories, which will be stories that we quickly burn through to kind of just mention that it's happening, and think of it kind of like as an honorable mentions for what could possibly have been the main story, but just for whatever reason wasn't as important as the main story. And then the third segment that we'll have is the conversation segment, where we will be discussing something that is more about ideas and less about current events. And then finally, we will then end with our outro. And so I feel that by structuring the episodes this way, we can have a good mix between kind of newsy, trendy stuff and stuff that's more interesting, and wrap it on a nice little bow for you guys. As far as seasons go, so this current episode and the previous episodes will be labeled as beta, and we'll be labeling a few episodes in advance as beta as well, probably like up to 10 here. And those episodes are labeled as beta because the structure has been so irregular, and we will likely have irregular upload schedules and irregular formats for a little while. But once our format is solid, we will then take the show out of beta. We'll have a launch being in air quotes, because really the only difference will be that we don't call it beta anymore. The SoundCloud account, we will no longer be uploading there, because I have discovered that in order to continue uploading there, I would have to pay for like their SoundCloud premium service, and I don't feel like paying $6 a month to host a podcast. But the YouTube version, we will be kind of emphasizing, and we will be putting a lot more energy into it. Anything else you wanted to mention before we get started?
Beer is good.
Okay, well, I guess we'll get started then. So, Facebook recently had a little bit of a problem. So, Facebook, through lackluster privacy controls, allowed Cambridge Analytica to access the personal data of millions of users. Cambridge Analytica then used the collected data to build profiles of each user, which was then possibly used by political campaigns, and possibly including the Trump campaign. There's not a lot of absolute knowns in this, but continuing on. Facebook stock dropped by a considerable margin, and Mark Zuckerberg was summoned before Congress. This has since reignited the ZUCC memes. The memes, the whole he's like a robot.
He's a robot.
A robot lizard person thing. I want to say that
he is kind of creepy. I mean,
yeah, just he is a little bit creepy, and there was the gif of him where he was like drinking water, but he did it in like the most suspicious looking way I've ever seen.
And then there's the picture where he's being escorted by security, and he's got a smile on his face, and somebody made a comment or a thing that goes, "This is like some superhuman creepy shit."
Yeah. Well, and I think my favorite thing from that was the picture of him where you can see that he has like a booster seat on the chair that he's sitting on when he's like doing this whole thing. So.
And they're like, "Oh, he's plugged into his phone charger." or some shit.
I love that. I love that joke. I gotta say though, the memes from this have been the best memes, and while I'm definitely very concerned about like privacy in Facebook and the way that Facebook handles personal private data, I gotta say it was kind of worth it for the memes. So for our next rapid fire story here, U.S. involvement in Syria. So Syria supposedly conducted chemical attacks which prompted outrage in the international community. I say supposedly because the groups that are now reporting this are the White Helmets, who have a history of faking stuff for media attention, and the rebels, like the Syrian rebels, who obviously directly benefit from international involvement. Because, if for some reason Syria decides to use chemical weapons, they'll get international support. It's possible that it was a false flag, but the people that are saying that it is are like Russia and the Syrian government, and the people that are saying that it's not a false flag is the U.S. government and the two groups that I mentioned before. And so it's like, well, who do I not trust the most? And the answer is I distrust all of them equally. So Trump then tweets threats to Syria about an incoming missile strike, and also sort of directs these threats at Russia by saying and Russia won't be able to stop this. The missiles have since been launched, and there are conflicting reports of how many of these missiles hit their targets or what the damage was. And for the record, the targets were chemical weapon sites and things related to the development or deployment of chemical weapons. So, anything to add there, or any questions you have on it?
I would just like to say that there are people out there that are really going off the deep end, and they're saying, oh my god, we're going to start World War III. No, Russia's not dumb enough to start World War III with us. And if anybody is going to be responsible for starting World War III over something like this, my money would be on North Korea.
Now, on to the third story. Now, this one is the story that I think was the closest to making it as the main story, and if this hadn't have happened at a similar time frame, this would be the main story. But the Count Dankula conviction. Count Dankula was tried and convicted of hate speech for an offensive video in which he trained his pug to Sieg Heil and to respond to the phrase, gas the Jews. Now, I don't know have you seen the video?
I have not.
Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pause our recording here real quick. So, what'd you think of the video?
The fuck is wrong with this guy? Does he have too much time on his hands? Is he extremely bored? Or was he fucking stoned?
I think possibly all three. If you've seen any of his other videos, again, all three are quite possible.
Oh, he looks fucking familiar.
Yeah,
I think I've seen some of his videos.
Yeah, so I actually did show you one of his videos. It was one about call centers.
Yep.
Which I think we both highly recommend that video. That is a perfect description of what working at a call center is like. But continuing on. So the video that he made was intended to be a joke directed at his girlfriend and at other friends that he knew and the kind of small following that he had. But then the various news media outlets and word of mouth kind of spread this video around, and it went super fucking viral. And so it's kind of unfortunate that I can't easily see the view count for this video. And this is actually worth noting. YouTube has basically super limited state this video. There's no share button. You can't see the view count on it. So much, there's no recommendations panel or anything. It's actually ridiculous. Since this video went viral, somebody made a complaint to the Scottish police, and he was arrested, and then he was charged with hate speech. And he was then dragged through court, and his court case is actually very interesting because he has been in court for about 2 years. And fun little fact about his court case actually went on longer than the Nuremberg trials, the trials in which the Nazis were sentenced for the horrible crimes against humanity they committed. So that's a little fun fact for you there.
Ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
That's just fucking stupid.
Yeah, and so after all this time in court, the judge convicted him guilty of hate speech, and his sentencing will be occurring tomorrow. I gotta say, the fact that he's been convicted guilty of this is already like a step too far, and this is horrifying, and we will definitely be updating on kind of how the sentencing goes and what kind of sentence he gets. And if it's bad enough, that might be our main story for next episode. So stay tuned for that. But also, I wanted to quickly mention that there will be 2 marches in the UK in support of Count Dankula. The first one in Scotland and the other one in London. These will be occurring roughly at about the same time, and it should be noted that in the London one, Sargon of Akkad will be in attendance, and he will be giving a speech. So I fully expect there to be some Antifa involvement at some point over the course of that march. So now on to the main news story. Now this is the one that we will actually be going all in on. And so the main news story for this episode is the Parkland, Florida school shooting. Now, I want to note real quick before we get started that there are kind of 2 things I wanted to hit on. The first thing is that we will not be naming the shooter, and we're not naming the shooter primarily to prevent glorification of school shooters. The second thing I wanted to note for our coverage on these tragedies is that we will be maintaining our stance on how tragedies should or should not be politicized, and that is that some time should be given for the people to mourn the loss, and that the initial coverage should be kind of messages of support to the victims. If you want to discuss the politics of the thing after the fact, go right ahead, but there should be like some time for people to grieve and not have it be like a political issue. So, that said, obviously, we send our condolences to those who were killed in the shooting, or who received like injuries, or those who had loved ones die, or those who were around for the school shooting. That said, we'll kind of launch into the story here. Now, there are 3 points that I kind of want to discuss when it comes to the shooting. So the first point that we'll discuss will be the child activists, namely David Hogg and Emma Gonzalez. The second point that I want to hit on is the gun control debate that has since spawned from the shooting, as it does from pretty much any other school shooting. And the third kind of point that I wanted to hit on was the weird and random violence in video games debate that has been occurring as a result of the school shooting. So first off, the child activists. Now, I'll let you get your 2 cents in on them in a moment here, but I do want to mention some quick kind of like bullet point details about the 2 main focal points of this movement. The first of the 2 major child activists is David Hogg. He is the son of Kevin Hogg, who is a former FBI agent. He has stated that he supports the Second Amendment. He has said that 99% of NRA members are responsible gun owners. He advocates for the banning of all bump stocks, raising the minimum age of gun ownership to 20, and ensuring universal background checks. And he criticizes the NRA and various politicians who have received donations from or have supported them. The second one to note is Emma Gonzalez. Her father immigrated to the United States from Cuba, and that patch that you've probably seen her wear in a few of the speeches she's given is more of like a heritage thing and isn't really like a mark of allegiance to like the Cuban dictatorship or something. A few other points on her. She says that she's not strictly no guns. She criticizes the NRA for being complicit in the shootings, which is a step above what David Hogg has pushed. She was the one that started the "We Call BS" slogan, and the kind of gun control measures that she's calling are very similar to the ones that David Hogg is calling for. So I'll go ahead and get your opinion on these 2 and any of the other activists you kind of wanted to mention.
All right, so my opinion. They do have the right to protest any way they want, but there are things that both of these 2 child activists, or whatever you want to call them, have done that honestly I think are way overboard. Like criticizing of certain media outlets or organizations, i.e. NRA, going after FedEx's CEO because he is a very staunch supporter of the NRA, and in fact he contributes quite a bit of money per year to the NRA, and he's calling for boycotts for businesses. What are you doing, dude? Are you boycotting businesses because they are for Second Amendment, which, in my opinion, basically negates the fact that you come out and say that you're not totally against the Second Amendment, but you want stauncher gun control. When you come out and you're personally attacking businesses like this or individuals that are either trying to criticize you, which you do need some criticism because you are announcing your thoughts publicly, anytime you go public with anything, you're going to get criticism. You're going to get people that don't agree with you. You're going to get people that voice their own opinion. That is things that happen to you when you go on a public forum. If you're not prepared for that, suck it up, Buttercup, because it's going to happen. And everything I've seen of this David Hogg kid, he's living it up in the limelight and he's sucking it up. Especially for the simple fact is when he said that he wanted to talk to the president about gun control, he had an opening. One of the cabinet members, I don't know who it was, they reached out to him and said, we would like to have you come and talk to President Trump about gun control. And then he goes on Twitter and brags about, oh, I told the president to fuck off. To me, that's unprofessional. If you're trying to lead a movement and you're trying to get something done when it comes to an agenda, you go and you do the talks you need to do to further your agenda to get something done. You don't act like a little punk and say, oh, I told the president to go fuck himself. Well, you don't do shit like that.
And not just that, but it's like if somebody's saying, like, look, I'm willing to have a conversation with you about a thing, and then you're like, no, I'm not going to have that conversation. It's like you're kind of conceding the point to them then.
I mean, I forget who it was, but it was the media person. She works for Fox News, and she made a tweet where she goes, oh, this kid's complaining about 4 colleges denying his entrance to their college and everything like this.
You're talking about the Laura Ingraham thing?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then basically he's like, Laura Ingraham then, conceded defeat to him and basically apologized. And he says, no, I don't apologize, or I don't take your apology. And he's still going after her advertisers and going after them. And it's like, dude, you won. Quit being a little bitch and say, okay, I won. Now let's go ahead and have a civilized conversation about our differences. It's
and instead it was basically like, your apology wasn't good enough for me, and so therefore I'm just going to unleash my hate mob on you. It's like...
Exactly. To me, that's fucking borderline doxing, in my opinion.
Well, and not just that. It's like, this kid has control of, like, this massive, like, following. And what does he use it for? Oh, to settle, like, petty, like, personal disputes with other people. Instead of, like, using it to actually, like, make changes in gun control. It's like, his focus should be entirely on making changes in gun control. If that's what he wants to do, right?
I don't think it is what he wants to do. He's doing it to garner a political following, and he's doing it to make himself famous. It's like, sorry, dude, your 15 minutes of fame are almost up.
Yeah, and it's like, here's kind of my take on him. So, what do you think about, like, the particular policies that he's advocated for? So first, I'll go point by point. What do you think about banning all bump stocks?
Honestly, I don't think he should be attacking bump stocks, because unless he was at the Vegas shooting, he shouldn't be going after bump stocks, because
they weren't used in that shooting.
They weren't used in this particular shooting.
At the same time, though, do you think that bump stocks are, like, a valid thing that we should be allowed to own? Because from my understanding, it allows the weapon to fire in a near fully automatic capacity. Is there anything about that I'm misunderstanding?
Quite a bit, actually. Basically, what bump stocks are designed to do is they're designed to put it's either in the front or the back of the trigger, but from my understanding, it's basically like an attachment that you put on the weapon, and what it does is you only do one trigger pull, and basically the recoil of the weapon bounces in and out of this plastic holder, and then from the movement of that, it keeps hitting the trigger or holds it down to the point where it continuously fires. So what it is basically a modification that you put on a semi-automatic weapon to make it simulate the use of a fully automatic weapon.
So, but if we have fully automatic weapons banned, surely we wouldn't want to allow people to own attachments that made them function similar to, or I guess, just similarly to a fully automatic weapon. Like, I would think...
Here's my thought. The answer isn't completely banning bump stocks. Put extra put extra regulations on them. I mean, take for instance silencers for guns. If you were to buy a silencer for a weapon, you have to go through so much fucking paperwork to get approved. You have to go through a more deeper background check. Basically, the ATF is the ones that are doing your background check if you were trying to buy a silencer. Like, it's extremely hard to get a fucking silencer for a weapon. It takes a lot longer to get it than a gun. Now, my opinion is, instead of outright banning bump stocks, do the same thing with bump stocks that you do with silencers. Make it harder to get a bump stock.
That sounds like a reasonable kind of answer to that, because it's like, I don't think nobody should be able to own bump stocks, but I definitely want it to be harder for insane people to acquire them. Because it's like, I'm sure there could be legitimate uses for a bump stock. So,
yeah, like target practice. I mean, there's a valid reason.
The second thing that he mentions is raising the age of gun ownership to 21. What do you think of that restriction?
I don't really have an opinion on that, and the reason being is, if you're going to do it, like, say for instance, there's certain states in the United States where you have to be 21 to be able to purchase a handgun. Utah, I know, is one of them, and you have to be 21. But rifles, on the other hand, you only have to be 18 to purchase. And you don't have to go through as rigorous of a background check to get a rifle in some states. Now, my thought process is, if you have to be 21 to buy one, why don't you have to be 21 to buy the other? And the reason for this is, it's a federal guideline for rifles. If you are 18 and you can pass the background check, you can buy a rifle.
Yeah, well, and not just that, but like handguns, because they're more compact, are easier to take
easier
somewhere.
To conceal, take somewhere, and in some cases they're easier to aim.
My thought process is simply that if we don't let people consume alcohol before they're 21, it's like, why do we let them buy guns before that age? You know what I mean?
Well, see, here's my thought process on that. If you want to restrict gun ownership until the age of 21, you should restrict joining the military until you're 21 as well. Because when you're 18, if you're a male, you are required within 30 days of your 18th birthday to enlist in the Selective Services draft, if there ever is a draft. You can join the military fresh out of high school as soon as you're 18. Well, guess what? You're going to learn how to fire a weapon as part of your training, and you're 18. So if you're gonna pass a legislation to make it so you have to be 21 to buy a firearm, you should make the entrance minimum age to the military be 21 years of age.
Well, and it's like, at the same time, because bear in mind, like, I understand, like, both perspectives, like, raise the minimum age to 21, but I also understand that, like, really, 18 should be, like, the age where we legalize drinking, in my opinion, because it's like, at 18, you should be an adult, and so you should be considered responsible for your actions, and so therefore, here's a bunch of privileges that we will then grant you, right? We'll give you your full natural rights. We'll allow you to vote. We'll allow you to own firearms. We'll allow you to drink if you so choose, because you're an adult and you can make your own choices. Me personally, the whole argument of like, oh, well, like the legal drinking age is 21, so therefore raise the minimum age of gun ownership to 21, only doesn't hold water primarily because I would like to see the drinking age drop to 18. But that's me personally. So the third aspect of this that he frequently mentions is ensuring universal background checks. I think you and I are both pretty in favor of background checks.
Yeah, but here's the thing. You already do background checks for it.
Exactly. Like, there's already an extensive background check process. And
well, it's more extensive in certain states versus others.
Yeah, but I would
say, for instance, in West Virginia, where I was born, you have to, when you go in, they do what they call a hold process when you buy the gun. So you go in, you fill out the paperwork, and you do all the transfer paperwork where they ask you, are you the originally the buyer of the gun or licensee or transferee of the gun? You answer all those questions. And then there was one that they put in there at I think it was the beginning of 2017 or the end of 2016. It was around the time that Trump got elected. And they put an extra question on the paperwork that said, are you lawfully or unlawfully the user of marijuana? Which was a big thing because, as you know, certain states have decriminalized it for recreational use.
Well, that's a weird question anyway, simply because it's like, how does that relate? Like, how does that stop gun violence?
The reason why that's there is because it's still illegal federally on federal level. So it's the same thing where there's certain laws that if you are in possession of a firearm and you are drinking alcohol, they can confiscate your weapon, because at that point you're drinking and you're under the influence. So you may or may not be of sound mind of body. Basically, things about background checks, it varies because each state has their own laws when it comes to what type of background check they're going to do when you try to purchase a firearm. Like, say, West Virginia, like I was mentioning. You go in, you select your gun, and you're like, yeah, I want that one. You fill out the information for the background check, and then what they do is they hold the gun and the information for 7 days. The state does their background check, and I believe the ATF or the FBI does it. And then within 7 days, if everything checks out, the gun shop calls you and they go, hey, everything passed, come on down, pay for the gun, and we'll go ahead and give you the gun. My understanding is in California, it's very similar. It's at least 7 days. And then there's other states where you walk into the gun shop, you make your selection, you fill out the thing. They call the number for the Brady check is what they call the background check. And they basically ask for some information. They check you out and they say either proceed or don't proceed. And then basically it goes through your local state's record of Bureau of Criminal Investigation or whatever they call it in whatever state you're at. And they're the ones that keep the records on whether or not you have it. So basically, let's say you have domestic violence on your record. That would stop you from getting a gun. There's questions on there that say, are you a fugitive of justice? If you answer yes to that question, you're not going to get a gun. There's another one that says, are you or have you ever been charged with harassing or stalking? If you answer yes to that, you're going to be denied to get a gun. There's another question on there that says, basically like the whole child support thing, like, do you have a grudge or, things of that nature? And then it'll ask you things about your mental health, whether or not the courts in your area have deemed you as a mental threat to yourself. If you answer yes to any of those. And here's the thing, in states that do background checks that are that quick, who's to say that somebody's not going to lie about that?
Well, I'm assuming that lying is probably like a federal offense, but that said,
it's a felony.
Somebody who's looking
to lie on this thing and they find out that you lie, it's a felony.
Yeah, but somebody who's going to go commit a gun crime is probably not too worried about having an additional felony on there.
Well, see, there's also more to it. Without me giving it away where I live, because there's creepy-ass motherfuckers out there, I do follow gun laws in pretty much all 50 states. In fact, I have a book that is updated with, as of about a year ago, the gun laws in all 50 states. Whether or not you can conceal carry there, whether or not if you're in X state and you want to travel to X state, whether or not the state you're traveling to will recognize your concealed carry permit in the state that you originally were issued that permit. So it's kind of nice to have that because I myself have a concealed carry permit. So let's say I want to travel to, I'm going to use New Mexico as a picking point here. If I was to go to New Mexico, I would not be able to carry my concealed carry firearm. Why? Because the state that I was issued my CCP in does not allow me to carry concealed in the state of New Mexico. I would also not be able to go to Illinois, New York, or California because they don't allow for concealed carry by citizens unless you're either military or law enforcement. Now, there are certain states where you can do what they call third-party sales. And depending on the state laws, you can sell a firearm or rifle to a third party and not require them to have a background check unless you yourself tell them, I'm going to sell you this firearm. And we're going to go to a local gun shop and we're going to pay for a background check to be done. And if you don't pass this background check, I'm not going to sell you this weapon. It is up to the person doing the third-party sale to begin with whether or not they want to do the background check, but it is not required by law. The only thing that is required is that you do up a bill of sale and you have it notarized. And then both people that are involving in the sale sign on the paper. A background check for a third-party sale is not required in certain states. And that is a loophole and is a very big potential problem that I think honestly needs to be closed.
So you're in favor of making sure that these background checks are universal, then?
Universal and are required for third-party sales that are not done in a environment like a gun shop. Because if you go to a gun shop, it's hands down. You're getting a background check whether you want it or not.
And I'm assuming this is what's referred to as the gun show loophole? Because I hear that bandied about a lot.
The gun show loophole is actually, it's a myth. It really is. Because if you go to a gun show, they're going to require a background check to be done. And the reason why is because most of the time when you go to a gun show, these are vendors that are working for gun shops. They're there representing their business and trying to strum up extra sales. So they're going to require you to do a background check. Now, if it's a third-party individual, they're just there showing off their guns or whatnot, and they sell you one, and it's a third party. If they have, chances are good that if that gun owner is making their own guns and they're selling them, they are required by ATF and federal law to have what they call a federal firearms license. You have to go and train with weapons, and you have to be in that area for X amount of hours. It is extremely hard and painstaking work to get an FFL, and the federal government just doesn't hand them out like candy bars. So the FFL basically states that you are legally able to manufacture guns and stamp them with serial numbers. If you try to sell a gun without a serial number, it is a Class A felony, and you will go to jail for a very long time if convicted. So there is enough legislation there, or regulation, that it's safe, but there are always steps to improve it. And by doing, as you call it, the gun show loophole, it's more for third-party sales than it is gun sales or gun shows, because they will require you to do a background check if you buy a gun at a gun show.
Okay. I think that was all pretty clear, and I think we did a good job kind of discussing most of the kind of things they were pushing for. One quick point, though, that I just felt like making about background checks, because I don't ever hear this mentioned. My concern with making mental health one of the things that we're checking for is that by telling people that, hey, look, if you have mental health problems, you're not going to be allowed to own a gun, you are also saying to people, hey, look, if you have mental health problems, but you would at some point like to own a gun, you better not come forward about it, otherwise you might not be allowed to own a gun. And so my suggestion would be that if you make mental health something that precludes you from, or mental health problems, something that precludes you from owning a gun, you should make that a kind of temporary thing, so that if they get treatment, and then if they're found to be of sound mental health, that they then are restored their Second Amendment rights and can own firearms. Because I think we should be encouraging people to seek treatment if they have mental health problems. So the kind of final point that I wanted to hit on was the violence video games debate that sort of occurred after this tragedy. Simply put, I think the debate around whether or not video games cause violence has been concluded, and the answer is a resounding no. There's no evidence that links violence to video games to causing increasing violent tendencies. There's no link, no study has confirmed any kind of a link, and any study that's been conducted has come to the opposite conclusion. The closest that has come, or the study that has come the closest to drawing a link, has seen an increase in aggression when people play violent video games. But the problem is, you also see this increase in aggression when people play like sports and any other activities that involve competition, because competition is naturally, it increases your aggression. So anybody that wants to try to link the two is stupid. There have been several people over the course of this whole debate that have tried to draw a link. Historically, the whole violence video games thing has been a bipartisan issue in a way. Like, for some reason, both wings seem to have members that oppose the whole violence video games narrative and those that kind of support the narrative. For example, there are some pretty good examples of people trying to scapegoat video games for, like, real-world violence. For example, you had a TV appearance where Hillary Clinton compared violence video games to the kind of consumption of lead, and said that they had like a similar like level of increasing violence. You had Trump recently who tweeted something to the effect of, video game violence and glorification must be stopped. It's creating monsters. So you get it from both sides. There was, funny enough, a good example of this is the Daily Wire, which had Matt Walsh, who took the video games cause violence end of things. His headline reads, "Stop pretending that violent video games are harmless just because you like playing them." And I'll link the article, and trust me, you'll want to read this, because it is, I think, the stupidest argument for this position that I have seen to date. Meanwhile, also on the Daily Wire, the headline reads, "President Trump wants to blame violence on video games. Here's why that won't work." And this one is by Emily Zanotti. I'm sorry for butchering your last name. But both of these are articles from the Daily Wire. So it's like, it's kind of interesting to see two takes from the same outlet.
I'm more likely not to go out and want to kill somebody after a long, hard day of work if I can come home and play, a first-person shooter game that I enjoy, like, say, Far Cry 5 or Far Cry 4 or, whatever.
Yeah.
I know the right from wrong, and I know that I'm not just going to go out there with a gun and be like, oh, look, a random person, let's shoot them. There's something that parents should be doing, and it's called parenting. Stop allowing teachers, stop allowing the media, fucking games and movies or whatever dictate what your child should be doing. Teach your kids right from wrong. That is why you're a fucking parent.
So, for the conversation today, we will be kind of introducing our new segment, which we're calling our book club. Now, I'm aware that the idea of a book club is not an original idea. I'm aware this is done all the time. I'm aware that even PewDiePie is doing a book club now. But I felt that it was important, since we're doing a political podcast, to on occasion...
PewDiePie needs to do a fucking book club. It might keep his ass out of fucking trouble.
Yeah, I know, right? I think because we run a politically oriented show, that it is important for us to cover a lot of the political literature. Now, I don't think it is advisable for us to start on something like Two Treatises of Government by John Locke, because that is really, really difficult to read through and understand and break down, right? Like, it's not even like just down to reading comprehension, it's just that I feel like it's something you have to build up to. So, that said, since we're going to be doing this book club on occasion, and I don't know how infrequently or frequently we'll do this, we're just going to kind of keep it loose for now, see kind of where this takes us. So, by the sounds of it, we'll be reading 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos by Jordan B. Peterson. So, if you want to follow along with us, read it. Okay, so thank you for listening to the show, listeners. We would very much appreciate it if you would like the video or the track or however you're watching this, and definitely subscribe to whatever channel this is on. So for YouTube, give us a like, subscribe to us. We do have a couple of social media handles that we would like to post out. If you want to follow the show for news and announcements, you can follow us on Twitter at Standard Soapbox, all one word. Then you can follow me at Vingar, Vinghar, and you can follow Rob at Snakes200.
Everyone stay safe, make safe decisions, don't be a complete tool, and be guided by the media. Follow your own path in life, and stay safe. We'll see you next time, and make sure you share if you like it with your friends. We need more listeners, of course.